The Unexpected War. Ethan Cole, a skilled but humble engineer, had no dreams of being a hero. He worked on cargo ships, quietly fixing engines and circuits. His life was simple, predictable, and grounded in reality. That all changed on a quiet evening when he was aboard the stellar Voyager, transporting goods to a distant colony. The Voyager was a sturdy ship, built for endurance, not speed. The journey was routine until the alarms blared, breaking the silence like a sharp scream. Ethan rushed to the control deck, where chaos unfolded. The captain shouted orders, pointing to the holographic display. On the screen, a strange alien fleet loomed in the dark void of space, their ships sharp and menacing. "Prepare for impact," the captain yelled as Ethan gripped a railing to steady himself. The first blast hit the Voyager, shaking the ship violently. Sparks flew and lights flickered as Ethan realized they were under attack. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. No one had answers. The aliens weren't in the database. No records, no warnings, just pure hostility. The crew scrambled to defend the ship, but the attackers were too advanced. Their weapons tore through the Voyager's defenses like paper. Within minutes, the ship was critically damaged, and evacuation became the only option. Ethan raced to the escape pods, his heart pounding. Around him, crew members screamed, panicked, and ran in every direction. He saw his friend, Sarah, struggling to release a stuck pod door. Without thinking, he ran to help. Together, they pulled the lever and the door hissed open. Sarah climbed in, tears streaming down her face. "You need to come," she shouted. "I'll follow," Ethan promised. But as the pod launched, an explosion rocked the ship, and Ethan was thrown against the wall. When he opened his eyes, the escape pods were gone. He was alone. The ship groaned, metal twisting under the pressure of the attack. Ethan knew he had minutes, maybe seconds, before the Voyager was destroyed. He sprinted to the last remaining pod and launched into the unknown just as the ship exploded behind him. Ethan's pod drifted through the cold expanse of space. His hands trembled as he checked the controls. The systems were basic: oxygen, navigation, and emergency supplies. The navigation panel blinked red. No signal detected. "What now?" Ethan muttered, his voice echoing in the small pod. He looked out the window, hoping to see rescue ships or friendly signals. Instead, he saw debris from the Voyager, floating silently. Then, something strange caught his eye. A bright blue glow pulsed in the distance, almost like a beacon. It wasn't a star. It was closer and alive with movement. With no other options, Ethan steered the pod toward it, curiosity and desperation driving him. As Ethan approached, the glowing object came into focus. It was a massive structure, almost like a city floating in space. Towers of light and metal stretched high, and strange ships buzzed around it like bees around a hive. The pod's systems beeped wildly, detecting energy signals off the charts. "This isn't human," Ethan whispered, both in awe and fear. His pod was pulled toward the structure by an unseen force. A tractor beam, he guessed. He braced himself as the pod landed with a soft thud in a brightly lit hangar. The silence was unnerving. Ethan stepped out of the pod, holding his breath. The air was breathable, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. He took a cautious step forward, scanning the area. The hangar was vast, filled with alien ships of sleek design and glowing symbols he couldn't understand. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the air. Ethan turned to see figures emerging from the shadows. They were tall, with shimmering blue skin and glowing eyes. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, as they surrounded him. Each carried a weapon, its sharp edges glowing faintly. Ethan raised his hands, his heart pounding. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. The aliens stared at him, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward, towering over him. It tilted its head, studying him like a curious predator. Before Ethan could say another word, a low, thunderous sound filled the hangar. The alien leader turned sharply, its glow intensifying. From a distance, another group of aliens entered, their armor darker, their eyes blazing red. They carried heavier weapons and moved with purpose. Ethan realized he had walked into a war zone. The blue aliens gestured for Ethan to follow, their urgency clear. Torn between fear and curiosity, Ethan obeyed. They led him through a maze of corridors, their sleek walls glowing faintly with energy. The thunderous sounds grew louder. Explosions, shouts, and the unmistakable hum of energy weapons. Ethan was thrust into a room with a large window overlooking the battlefield. Below, two alien factions clashed in a fierce fight. The blue aliens fired precision shots, defending their home with everything they had. The red-armored invaders retaliated with brutal force, their weapons leaving destruction in their wake. One of the blue aliens turned to Ethan, pointing at him and then at a glowing console. It spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but the message was clear. They needed his help. Ethan hesitated. He was no soldier, just an engineer. But as he looked at the chaos below, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about survival. It was about doing what was right. Gritting his teeth, Ethan nodded. "All right. Tell me what to do." The alien connection. Ethan opened his eyes to a strange, glowing ceiling above him. He wasn't in his escape pod anymore. The air was warm and filled with a faint hum, like a heartbeat in the walls. As he sat up, he realized he was lying on a soft, gel-like bed that seemed alive, pulsing gently beneath him. "Where am I?" Ethan muttered, his voice shaky. Before he could process his surroundings, the doors slid open silently. A figure entered, an alien with shimmering blue skin and glowing golden eyes. It stood tall and graceful, wearing what looked like intricate armor made of woven light. The alien tilted its head, observing Ethan with curiosity. Hi," Ethan said, raising a hand in an awkward wave. The alien didn't respond. Instead, it held out a strange device, a small, glowing orb, and gestured for Ethan to take it. Hesitant, but with no better options, he reached out and touched the orb. Instantly, a rush of images flooded his mind. A vast forest of glowing trees, a village of blue-skinned aliens, and finally, a young alien child reaching out to him. The orb pulsed, and Ethan heard a voice in his head, soft yet commanding. "Do not be afraid. We mean you no harm." Ethan blinked in shock. "You can speak to me through this thing." The alien nodded, though it didn't move its lips. Instead, the orb glowed brighter, and the voice continued. "You are on our sanctuary. We saved you from the wreckage. You are safe, for now." Ethan was led through the alien structure, a mix of advanced technology and organic beauty. Walls shimmered with light, as though alive, and floors shifted underfoot like soft earth. Everywhere he looked, he saw more of the blue-skinned beings, their eyes glowing with an inner light. He was brought to what appeared to be a council chamber. Around him, a circle of older aliens sat, their postures rigid and their gazes fixed on him. One of them, the tallest and most ornate, stepped forward and gestured toward the orb again. Ethan hesitated but complied, allowing the voice to fill his mind once more. "We are the Velari. You are the first of your kind to set foot here. We should not have interfered, but—" The voice paused, and the alien gestured to another figure entering the chamber. It was the child from the vision, smaller than the rest, but with the same glowing eyes. The child stepped forward fearlessly, its gaze locked on Ethan. There was an air of innocence about it, but also something deeper, a connection Ethan couldn't explain. The voice in his mind returned. "Our young one, Lura, found you. She believes you were sent here for a reason." Ethan was stunned. "Sent here? No, I'm just a guy who got lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you see it. My ship was attacked, and I barely made it out alive. I didn't come here on purpose." The council exchanged glances, their glow dimming slightly. Lyra stepped closer to Ethan and held out a small glowing crystal. Ethan hesitated but took it. As soon as it touched his palm, he felt a warmth spread through his body. Images flashed in his mind again, this time of an enormous creature, its glowing red eyes piercing the darkness, its roar shaking the ground. Ethan gasped. What was that? The Ravager, the voice answered grimly. It hunts us. We have lived in peace for centuries, but now it threatens our very existence. Lyra believes you can help us stop it. Ethan shook his head. I'm just an engineer. I don't fight monsters. You've got the wrong guy. Lyra stepped forward, her small hand reaching for Ethan's. When she touched him, a strange calm washed over him. He saw another vision, this time of himself standing beside the Velari, facing the Ravager together. The image felt impossibly real, as though it were a memory waiting to happen. The council debated among themselves in their own language, the orb glowing faintly in Ethan's hand. Finally, the leader turned back to him. We do not trust easily, but Lyra sees something in you. If you will help us, we will share the secrets of our world. If not, we will guide you to safety. Ethan looked down at Lyra, who gazed back with a mixture of hope and determination. He felt a tug in his chest, something he couldn't quite explain. This wasn't his fight, but how could he turn his back on them? Taking a deep breath, Ethan nodded. All right, I'll help, but you better tell me everything I need to know about this Ravager. For the first time, the Velari Council seemed to relax, their glow brightening. Lyra smiled, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. Ethan didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his crash landing wasn't an accident. Whatever was coming, he was ready to face it. Or so he hoped. Learning to trust. Ethan stood in the heart of the Velari village, surrounded by structures that glowed softly, blending perfectly with the natural beauty of the forest. Towering trees with bioluminescent leaves stretched high into the sky, their roots intertwining with the Velari homes. It felt alive, like the planet itself was breathing. But Ethan didn't feel welcome. The Velari watched him from a distance, their glowing eyes filled with suspicion. Only Lyra, the young Velari who had first reached out to him, stood by his side. She seemed to trust him completely, though the others clearly didn't share her belief. This is awkward, Ethan muttered to himself, shifting uneasily. He had faced machinery breakdowns in deep space, hostile corporate bosses, and even the terror of a crashing ship, but this silent judgment from a group of aliens, that was new. The Velari leader, an elder named Vale, approached Ethan with measured steps. His gaze was sharp, and his glowing staff pulsed faintly in rhythm with his voice as he spoke. The orb in Ethan's hand lit up, translating Val's words into his mind. You are here because of Lyra's actions. She believes you can help us, but many among us disagree. Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of their doubt. Look, I didn't ask to be here. I was just trying to survive. But if you got a monster problem, I'll do what I can to help. Val's glow dimmed slightly, a sign of contemplation. Helping us requires more than words. If you wish to earn our trust, you must prove your worth. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? A test, a trial. Lyra tugged on Ethan's sleeve, her small hand pointing toward a distant part of the forest. The elders murmured among themselves, and Vale finally nodded. The Ravager's presence grows stronger near the crystal hollow. If you are to help us, you will need to understand the danger. Lyra will guide you. Ethan followed Lyra through the glowing forest, the air humming with life. Strange creatures skittered across branches, their bodies radiating soft light. The path grew darker as they approached the crystal hollow, the trees twisting into eerie shapes. Is it always this spooky out here? Ethan asked, trying to mask his nervousness. Lyra didn't respond, but she offered him a reassuring glance. The hollow opened before them like a cavern carved from light and shadow. In its center stood a massive crystal formation, pulsing faintly with energy. Ethan felt a strange pull toward it, as though it were alive. Surrounding the crystal were deep claw marks etched into the ground and the nearby trees. Ethan knelt, running his hand over the marks. This thing, it's big, really big. Lyra pointed toward the crystal, her expression somber. Ethan stepped closer and noticed something peculiar. The crystal wasn't just glowing. It was vibrating, almost like it was singing. As he reached out to touch it, Lyra grabbed his arm and shook her head urgently. "Okay, no touching." "Got it," Ethan said, stepping back. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed through the hollow. Ethan froze, his heart racing. Lyra pressed herself against him, her small hand clutching his sleeve tightly. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps. The ground trembled slightly, and the trees around the hollow seemed to shrink under the presence of something massive. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Then it appeared, a creature like nothing Ethan had ever seen. Its body was massive, covered in dark, jagged scales that shimmered with a red glow. Its eyes burned like fire, and its sharp claws tore into the earth with every step. The Ravager had arrived. Ethan barely had time to react as the Ravager's roar shook the air. Lyra pulled at his arm, urging him to retreat, but Ethan's gaze was locked on the creature. It wasn't just a predator. It radiated intelligence, a terrifying awareness that made his blood run cold. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said, finally snapping out of his trance. He grabbed Lyra's hand and ran, dodging through the twisted trees as the Ravager's growls echoed behind them. The forest seemed alive, almost helping them escape. Branches shifted, creating narrow paths, while glowing vines pulsed with light, leading the way. Ethan didn't stop to question it. His focus was on putting as much distance as possible between them and the monster. After what felt like an eternity, they burst into a clearing where Vale and several Velari warriors waited. Their weapons glowed with a soft blue light, and their expressions were grim. "The Ravager," Ethan gasped, pointing toward the direction they had come from. "It's there. It's real. And it's angry." Vale nodded solemnly. "Now you see the truth. This is what we face." Ethan took a deep breath, his heart still racing. He looked at the Velari, then at Lyra, who gazed up at him with trust in her glowing eyes. "All right," he said, standing straighter. "If we're going to stop that thing, we're going to need a plan. And I think I might have an idea." For the first time, Val's glow brightened slightly, a sign of cautious hope. The Velari warriors exchanged glances, their grips on their weapons tightening. Ethan didn't know if his plan would work, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He was part of this fight, earning their trust. Ethan crouched behind a cluster of glowing vines, watching the Velari warriors prepare for battle. Their weapons were elegant and strange, pulsing with blue energy that seemed alive. The Velari moved in perfect synchronization, their silent communication a language Ethan couldn't decipher. He felt out of place, an outsider in a war he barely understood. "I'm not a fighter," he muttered to himself. "I fix things. That's it." Lyra, the young Velari who had insisted on bringing him here, appeared at his side. Her glowing eyes were filled with determination, and she handed him a small, unfamiliar device. It was shaped like a smooth metallic orb, etched with faint symbols that pulsed in rhythm with her touch. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Ethan asked, turning it over in his hands. Lyra gestured toward the defensive line, then to Ethan's chest. She pointed at the device, and then at the forest beyond, where the Ravager's roar echoed faintly. Her meaning was clear. She wanted him to help. Ethan shook his head. "You don't get it. I don't know how to fight. I'd only get in the way." But Lyra wasn't giving up. She pressed the device into his hands again and touched his arm, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him, a sense of calm, of quiet confidence. He didn't know if it was her touch or something more, but it steadied his nerves. The Velari warriors advanced toward the edge of the forest, their movements purposeful. Ethan followed hesitantly, clutching the device as if it were a lifeline. The forest grew darker, its bioluminescent light dimming under the weight of an approaching storm. The Ravager was close. Vale, the Velari leader, appeared at Ethan's side, his staff glowing faintly in the gloom. The orb in Ethan's pocket pulsed as Val's voice entered his mind. "You do not belong here, human, but Lyra believes in you, and we honor her instincts. Tell us, how would you fight the Ravager?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't have the weapons or the training the Velari possessed, but he did know one thing: survival. On countless cargo missions, he'd faced life-threatening emergencies. He wasn't a warrior, but he was a problem solver. "Your weapons are fast, but that thing's faster," Ethan said, thinking aloud. "We need to trap it. Slow it down. Use the terrain against it." Val's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. "A trap. It has never been done. It's risky, but we don't have many options," Ethan replied. "If you can lead it to an area with thick trees, I can rig something up. A distraction, maybe even something to hold it in place." Vale studied him for a moment before nodding. "Show us." Ethan worked quickly, using the tools and supplies the Velari provided. He felt their skeptical eyes on him as he cobbled together a crude but effective plan. Using the metallic device Lyra had given him, he created a simple trigger mechanism tied to one of the glowing vines, which he realized were highly reactive to touch. "Okay," Ethan said, stepping back to survey his work. "This should create a burst of light and sound when the Ravager steps here. It might confuse it long enough for you to strike." The Velari warriors murmured among themselves, their doubt evident. Vale raised a hand to silence them. "We will test your trap, but if it fails, your presence here will no longer be tolerated." Ethan nodded, swallowing his nerves. "Fair enough." The forest grew eerily quiet as the Velari spread out, taking defensive positions. Ethan stayed behind the trap, his heart pounding. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of energy from the Velari weapons. Then the Ravager's roar shattered the stillness. It was closer than before, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The air seemed to thicken, charged with its presence. Ethan gripped the edge of a nearby tree, watching as the massive creature emerged from the shadows. Its glowing red eyes swept across the forest, searching for its prey. The Velari warriors held their ground, their weapons aimed but silent, waiting for the perfect moment. The Ravager moved toward the trap, its claws digging into the earth. Ethan held his breath, praying his makeshift device would work. When the creature's foot brushed the vine, the trap activated. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a deafening crack. The Ravager recoiled, roaring in fury. It swung its massive claws wildly, disoriented by the sudden burst. The Velari seized the moment, launching their attack. Bolts of blue energy streaked through the air, striking the creature's armored hide. For a brief moment, it seemed like the plan was working. The Ravager stumbled, its movements slowed by the assault. But then it recovered, its rage amplified. It lunged toward the Velari, its claws tearing through trees and earth. Ethan's heart sank. The trap had bought them time, but it wasn't enough. Lyra appeared beside him, holding another glowing device. She gestured urgently, pointing toward the Ravager. Ethan took the device, realizing it was some kind of power source. An idea struck him, desperate, but it might work. He ran forward, ignoring Val's shout of warning. The Ravager turned its burning gaze toward him, its roar shaking the ground. Ethan hurled the device toward the creature, aiming for the weak spot in its chest, where the scales glowed faintly. The device exploded in a brilliant burst of blue energy, sending the Ravager reeling. It stumbled backward, roaring in pain, before retreating into the shadows of the forest. The Velari stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered. Vale approached Ethan, his glow brighter than before. "You are reckless, human, but perhaps not useless." Ethan smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. I'll take that as a compliment. For the first time, the Velari seemed to look at him not as an intruder, but as an ally. And as Lura smiled up at him, Ethan realized he had taken his first real step toward earning their trust. The Velari's secret. The Velari village pulsed with quiet tension as Ethan sat cross-legged in the central chamber, surrounded by the elders. The soft glow of the bioluminescent walls reflected the weight of their conversation. Vale, the elder leader, held a crystal shard in his hands. Its soft, golden light seemed alive, shifting with an energy Ethan couldn't comprehend. "This is more than just a glowing rock, isn't it?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Vale nodded, his glowing staff pulsing faintly. "The crystal of ancients. It is the heart of our people. Our survival depends on it." Ethan leaned forward. "Let me guess. The Ravager wants it." Vale's glow dimmed slightly, a sign of unease. "The Ravager does not simply want it, it is bound to it. Long ago, our ancestors created the crystal to maintain balance on this planet. It holds the essence of the Velari and our connection to the land. But with such power came a cost." Ethan frowned. "A cost?" The elder gestured, and the orb Ethan carried pulsed to life, projecting images into the air. Ethan watched as scenes unfolded, a thriving Velari civilization, the creation of the crystal, and then chaos. The Ravager, smaller then but no less terrifying, emerged from the crystal's light, a guardian born of energy and fury. "The Ravager exists to protect the crystal," Vale explained. "But over time, it has grown unstable, its purpose warped. Now it destroys indiscriminately. If we cannot contain it, it will destroy us all." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, processing what he'd just learned. "So, let me get this straight. You've got an ancient power source that's both the key to your survival and the reason a giant monster is trying to kill you." Val's glow flickered in what Ethan guessed was annoyance. Simplistic, but accurate. Lura stepped forward, holding a smaller shard of the crystal. She offered it to Ethan, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. As he took it, a strange warmth spread through his hand. The shard pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and Ethan felt a deep connection he couldn't explain. "This feels alive," Ethan said, his voice quiet. Vale nodded. "It is. The crystal resonates with those who have the courage to protect it. That is why Lura brought you here. She believes you share its strength." Ethan looked at Lura, who smiled softly. Her trust in him was unwavering, and it stirred something deep within him. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He had a role to play in this. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden tremor that shook the village. The Velari warriors rushed to their posts as Val's staff flared brightly. "The Ravager is close," Val said grimly. "We must act now." Ethan stood, gripping the shard tightly. "You said the Ravager is tied to the crystal. Can we use that to stop it?" Vale hesitated. "To stop it, we would need to sever its connection to the crystal. But doing so risks destabilizing the energy that sustains our people." Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't a fighter, but he was a problem solver. If the crystal was both the source of the Ravager's power and its weakness, then maybe there was a way to use that against it. "What if we trick it?" Ethan suggested. "Lure it to a place where we can control the fight. Use the crystal's energy to trap it instead of destroying it." Val's glow brightened slightly, a sign of cautious approval. "A dangerous plan, but perhaps it is our only option." The Velari began their preparations, guided by Ethan's plan. They would use a decoy crystal to lure the Ravager into an ancient ruin deep in the forest, a place where the energy lines of the planet converge. Ethan worked alongside the Velari, using his engineering skills to modify their tools into traps. As they worked, Lura stayed close to Ethan, her curiosity unyielding. She watched him intently, mimicking his movements and gestures. It made him smile, even in the midst of the tension. "You've got a knack for this, kid," he said, handing her a small tool. Maybe when this is over, you can show me how you do that glowy eye thing." Lyra giggled, a sound that lightened the heavy air around them. For a moment, Ethan forgot about the danger looming just beyond the trees. As the final preparations were made, Vale approached Ethan. "The plan is risky. If it fails, there will be no second chance." Ethan nodded, gripping the shard in his hand. "I know, but if we don't try, there won't be anyone left to make a second plan." Vale studied him for a moment before placing a hand on his shoulder. "The Velari do not trust easily, but tonight we place our hope in you. Do not fail us." Ethan swallowed hard. "No pressure, huh?" The ground trembled again, and the distant roar of the Ravager echoed through the forest. It was coming. Ethan looked at Lyra, who gave him a small nod of encouragement, then turned toward the glowing ruins where they would make their stand. He wasn't a hero, but tonight he would have to be. The final stand. The ruins glowed faintly in the moonlight, their towering spires of crystal and stone pulsing with an ancient, forgotten energy. Ethan stood at the center of the clearing, his heart pounding as he surveyed the scene. Around him, the Velari warriors moved silently, their weapons at the ready. Vel's staff glimmered faintly, a beacon of leadership in the tense air. Lyra tugged at Ethan's sleeve, holding out a small metallic orb. It was one of the traps they had prepared, a device that, when activated, would release a burst of energy strong enough to disorient the Ravager. Ethan took it, nodding to the young Velari. "This is it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Time to see if we can pull this off." The plan was simple, at least in theory. Lure the Ravager into the ruins, trap it using the decoy crystal, and neutralize it with the energy traps. But simple plans rarely stayed simple, especially when dealing with a creature as powerful as the Ravager. Vale approached, his glowing eyes narrowing as he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It is time. Are you ready, human?" "Ready? No," Ethan replied, forcing a nervous laugh. "But let's do it anyway." Val's glow brightened slightly in what Ethan hoped was approval. The elder raised his staff, signaling the Velari to take their positions. Lyra stayed close to Ethan, clutching a smaller shard of the crystal in her hands. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. The first sign of the Ravager's approach was the tremor beneath their feet. The ground seemed to ripple with its steps, the air thickening with its presence. The ruin's faint glow began to flicker as if responding to the creature's arrival. "Stay calm," Ethan whispered to himself, gripping the trap in his hand. He glanced at Vale, who stood resolute, his staff raised high. The Velari warriors tightened their grips on their weapons, their glowing eyes fixed on the forest's edge. Then it appeared. The Ravager stepped into the clearing, its massive frame illuminated by the ruin's light. Its dark, jagged scales shimmered with a fiery red glow, and its eyes burned with a predatory fury. The creature let out a guttural roar, shaking the air and sending a wave of fear through the Velari ranks. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. Big. It's so much bigger up close. The Ravager's gaze locked onto the decoy crystal, which pulsed brightly in the center of the ruins. It took a slow, deliberate step forward, its claws digging into the earth. The Velari held their ground, their weapons aimed but silent, waiting for the perfect moment. As the Ravager approached the decoy, Ethan triggered the first trap. A burst of blue light erupted from the ground, momentarily blinding the creature. It roared in anger, swinging its massive claws wildly. The Velari launched their first wave of attacks, bolts of energy streaking through the air and striking the Ravager's hide. The creature staggered but quickly recovered, its rage intensifying. It charged toward the decoy, its claws smashing through the ruins. Ethan activated the second trap, releasing another burst of energy. This time, the Ravager stumbled, its movements slowing as the traps began to take effect. "Now," Vale shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. The Velari warriors unleashed a coordinated assault, their weapons glowing with a fierce blue light. The Ravager roared in pain, but its strength seemed endless. It lashed out, striking down several ruins and narrowly missing a group of Velari. Ethan's heart raced as he activated the final trap. A powerful energy burst designed to immobilize the creature. The ground shook as the trap activated, releasing a wave of light that enveloped the Ravager. For a moment, it froze, its glowing eyes dimming. "This is our chance," Ethan yelled, turning to Vale. "We need to finish it now." Vale nodded, raising his staff. "Focus your energy. Do not let it recover." The Velari poured their remaining strength into the assault, their weapons blazing with energy. Ethan, clutching the shard Lura had given him, joined in, using the crystal's power to amplify the traps. The ruins glowed brighter than ever, their ancient energy resonating with the Velari's efforts. But the Ravager wasn't finished. With a deafening roar, it broke free from the energy field, its rage reaching a terrifying peak. It charged toward the decoy crystal, its claws outstretched. Ethan's mind raced. The decoy won't hold it. We need tow. Before he could finish, Lura stepped forward, holding her shard of the crystal high. The shard glowed brightly, its energy resonating with the ruins and the decoy. The Ravager stopped in its tracks, its fiery eyes locking onto the young Velari. "Lura, no," Ethan shouted, fear gripping him. But Lura stood firm, her small frame radiating a strength Ethan hadn't seen before. The shard's light grew brighter, enveloping the Ravager in a cocoon of energy. The creature roared, thrashing wildly, but it couldn't move. Ethan realized what she was doing. She's stabilizing it. She's calming it. The Velari watched in stunned silence as the Ravager's movements slowed. Its eyes dimmed, and its massive frame seemed to relax. The ruins pulsed with a steady light, matching the rhythm of the shard in Lura's hands. Vale stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "The bond. It is restored." Ethan stared, his heart pounding. Lura had done what no one else could. She had used the crystal's power not to destroy, but to heal. As the Ravager lowered its head, retreating into the forest, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle was over, but the war had been won in a way he never expected. Lura turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with quiet triumph. Ethan knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved us all, kid," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "And you didn't even need a trap." For the first time, Ethan felt like he truly belonged, not as an outsider, but as part of something greater. A new beginning. The morning after the battle, the Velari village was alive with a soft, radiant glow. The towering trees, once trembling with fear, stood tall and vibrant. The crystal at the heart of the ruins pulsed steadily, its energy no longer chaotic but calm, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Ethan sat at the edge of the village, staring out into the forest where the Ravager had disappeared. He still couldn't believe it. The creature, a force of destruction, had been subdued, not by weapons or traps, but by Lura's quiet courage. She had wielded the crystal's power in a way no one expected, forging a bond that saved both the Velari and their world. "Still here, human." Val's voice broke through his thoughts. The elder stood beside him, his staff glowing faintly. His expression, though unreadable, carried a sense of respect. Ethan smirked, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I didn't know where else to go." Vale tilted his head slightly, his glow brightening. "You have done more for us than we ever could have asked. The Velari owe you a debt we cannot repay." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Lura, she's the real hero." The mention of her name brought a smile to Val's face. "She has shown us the strength of innocence and trust. But you, Ethan, have shown us something else. The courage to act, even when the odds seem impossible." As the Velari prepared for a day of celebration, Lura approached Ethan, holding something in her small hands. It was a pendant, crafted from a shard of the crystal, and set in a delicate frame of woven light. She held it out to him, her glowing eyes bright with emotion. "For me." Ethan asked, surprised. Lyra nodded, pressing the pendant into his palm. Its energy was warm, familiar, and comforting. Vale stepped forward, his staff glowing brighter. It is a symbol of our trust. You are no longer just an outsider, Ethan Cole. You are part of the Velari. Ethan swallowed hard, touched in a way he hadn't expected. I don't know what to say. Then say nothing, Vale replied. Let your actions speak, as they always have. As the village buzzed with life, Ethan noticed a faint hum from his old communication device, which he had almost forgotten. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the signal blinking. The rescue beacon he'd activated during his crash had finally reached someone. Looks like my ride's coming, Ethan said quietly, staring at the blinking light. He turned to Vale and Lyra, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. When the rescue ship arrived, a sleek vessel with the emblem of Earth's colonies, Ethan stood at the edge of the village, his bag packed. The Velari gathered around him, their glowing eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. You could come with us, Ethan offered, looking at Lyra. Earth's not so bad. We've got snacks and music. You'd like it. Lyra smiled but shook her head. Vale stepped forward, his glow steady. This is her home, as it is ours. But you, Ethan, will always have a place here. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He stepped toward the ship but stopped, turning back one last time. You know, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I think I'll miss this place more than I ever thought I would. Lyra ran up to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Ethan hugged her back, his heart heavy. As the ship ascended into the sky, Ethan looked out the window, watching the glowing village grow smaller and smaller. He touched the pendant around his neck, feeling its warmth, and smiled. Back on the Velari world, the crystal pulsed with a steady light, its energy spreading beyond the village, deep into the planet's core. Something was changing, something bigger than any of them realized, and Ethan, even light years away, felt it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just Ethan Cole, the engineer. He was part of something far greater. And though he was leaving the Velari behind, their bond would never truly fade. Some connections, he realized, are bigger than distance, bigger than words. They are written in the light of the stars, unbreakable and eternal.